All right. Sounds good. Okay. All right. Well, I'm excited to have some time to chat with you all and share some ideas about mental health and well-being among Appalachian college students. So first thing we'll start with is I'm going to have a lot of disclaimers. I'll also let you know I'm very informal, as Carolyn and some of y'all who have worked with me before. So if you have thoughts or comments, please jump in, drop it in the chat. If y'all are watching the chat, let me know, but also feel free to just open up your mic and jump in if you have ideas or thoughts to share. And so the first thing, like we said, important disclaimers and whatnots. So first of all, I use the term Appalachia. Even though I teach lots of classes where we talk about Appalachian culture and different issues related to the region, I'm always aware that Appalachia in a lot of ways is sort of hard to define because it sort of has its roots in more of a political definition. It goes from like Missouri all the way up to New York. So I always want to be aware that what we're really talking about are how different cultural and environmental and experiential factors come together to sort of create different situations for the students that we serve. And so we're going to be looking at, a really specific sort of subset of issues and so forth. Certainly not something that's going to paint the whole region. So I always want to be careful and recognize that, for myself as well. And I always want to avoid that us and them trap of, somehow Appalachian culture, rural areas are somehow different, and so just kind of wanted to recognize all of those sorts of things in general. My roots are in Southern West Virginia. So my colleague over in Concord, I want to say, hey, I'm from McDowell County. So a lot of my experiences are related to students in that central Appalachian region. And certainly that doesn't capture the whole region, and it doesn't capture all of the mental health challenges that students have in different areas. So I like to start out by reminding all of us that part of what we're talking about when we talk about mental health, anyone's mental health and well-being or in communities, is we all have a worldview. We didn't come in knowing anything. We had to build everything with our experiences. And our students certainly have done this up to the point that we meet them, and they certainly will continue to do that long after they leave us. And I like this little example. Y'all probably seen it in a lot of different places. And I always ask people, how many triangles do you see? Feel free to yell it out, drop it in the chat, hold up your fingers. Maybe you're seeing 2. Maybe you're seeing.
I see 8.
8. How many of you see 8? Yeah. There you go. There you go. So in reality, there are no triangles there. There are none. There's nothing that meets the definition. We've got no lines. There's not enough continuous lines, but yet our brain says it's there. And that's sort of our worldview. Okay. It's not there. We've created it. That didn't sound quite right. It is there. But our specific worldview and how we make sense of the world we create, and our students are no exception. And we know that because that's in play, and because preparing for college is so complicated and complex and involves so many factors, students come to us in different places in their development and in their perception of life and in their level of preparation. And so there's all kinds of things that have come into play up to that point that have sort of created a worldview for them about what college is going to be. And, I'll kind of own some things about my own background. I'm first gen, but both of my parents went to college. They just didn't get degrees. My dad went on the GI Bill for a little while, and my mom got a teaching certificate. But I had a lot of structure and preparation and privilege about at least what it was going to be like, and a lot of people telling me what to expect. and saying I could do this. And truth to be told, I'm not sure I had a choice. It was just sort of, was going to do this. And, my kiddos as they come through are same. So their worldview is very much sort of pre-adapted to what they're going to experience. And that's very significant. And so even though we sort of feel like, yeah, I mean, college is out there in the larger environment, people understand it. I always say, and I feel like I could say this because I've been in academia my whole career, we're a little bit of a weird club. We got a few secret handshakes out there. We got a few ideas that have become embedded in the structure that can create some unique challenges for our students. And so I think it's important to bear that in mind, all the time when we're talking about the mental health and well-being of our students. So these statistics, I'm going to guess based on the introductions. I'm so excited that our group today is so diverse. This is not news. Mental health needs among college students are rising, and we could probably spend hours talking about why that is. Some of it's because we're aware. They've always been there, but we're aware. Maybe there was a time where when students faced those challenges, there was nowhere to go, and they just sort of quietly went away, and we didn't know. Nor, as a colleague of mine said, it's amazing what you don't find when you don't look. So we may not have been looking. But studies today estimate somewhere between 60 and 75% of students meet criteria for some type of mental health concern. Now, that's the whole range from mild to very significant. We know that the most common are anxiety, depression, trauma-related issues, substance use. But those are also sort of the diagnostic boxes that we've created. So we want to today kind of play with taking some of the stuff, unpacking it from those boxes, and thinking about, so what really is going on here with some of our students. I always forget, because in so many conversations, are you all getting this too? So many times we go, well, it's the pandemic. Pandemic did it. Are y'all hearing that a lot in places you are? It's
yes.
Yeah, it didn't help. I mean, let's be real, right? It didn't help. But they were going up before then. COVID certainly exacerbated the problem. But it didn't cause it. It didn't make it happen. We were seeing those needs going up even before then. I think what we have to bear in mind is that there have been these changes going on for decades. And some of it actually is sort of in some ways good news. I would say if we look at the old model for higher education back in the day, we don't have to go. It was a very privileged model. Very few people went. And so if you went, you probably had the schema that everybody else has about it because other people in your family had gone. There were lots of resources to support it. It was not inclusive. It was not an inclusive environment if we go way, way back in the day. And so as we become more inclusive, as we really strive, and it's so exciting to see because truth in advertising, I'm a little far in my career, so I've been able to see these changes unfold and continue. So as we become more open, we have to look at the idea that some of the mental health issues may be arising because we're redesigning what we're doing. We're redesigning the house. And we need to make sure that we're providing the supports and the right environment that is there for everyone. Getting away from the idea of, is the student ready for college, but looking at, are we ready for the student? Do we have what the student needs? So I'll just pause there and see if anybody has any thoughts or things to add on that. Okay.
Marianna, this is Carolyn. Can I add something? Last month, Candace Lane shared our didactic, and she talked a little bit about that concept as well, and talked about classroom techniques, to help students with their mental health and one of the points that really stuck with me that she shared was for us to stop or reject the impulse to kind of say, well, when I was in school, because for many of us, there are some younger faculty members and staff members, but, for a lot of people that are teaching and working in staff positions, it's been, 10, 20, 30 years since we were in school, and we have that tendency to relate our own experience. But she made the point that college has changed. And I just think it really stuck with me. And I thought it went along with what you were sharing too.
Absolutely. And I think she's so spot on and has had that experience. And I usually tell my students, if anybody my age starts telling you about when I was in school, I could work at McDonald's and pay my tuition, you can't do that. It's just not that way. It's completely different. So yeah, I think that's a very important thing to bookmark. One of the things I hesitated about sharing this statistic, but I'm going to throw it out there because I think we can chew on it as a group for a little bit. If you look at some of the studies, we always seem to be fascinated with the IQ of our college students and where is it. I actually think this is good news. It's been steadily going down a bit. Now, because we know what tests do and don't do and why they change and so forth. It's not that we're seeing less smart students. It's that we're seeing more diverse students that the test doesn't measure very well, who have potential to be here. So I think that's an indicator that we're drawing more students into higher education, and they are going to sort of drive that change. So I think that's very, very important. So just for a minute, not that we need to go through all of this, but, maybe kind of reflect on, and certainly if you want to share, throw it out there. Why did you go to college? Why is education valuable? Why is it important? Do we put it on a bit of a pedestal in some ways? Thoughts?
I don't know about many. I went to college because I was the first person within my family on my mother's side completely throughout the generations, and the first on my father's side to go directly out of high school. So that was kind of my motivation.
And it's respected.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to add one too. I mean, I might have a little bit of a different Appalachian point of view because my family is more ethnic, like more Slavic. However, they were definitely coal miners living in a small Appalachian town, and they had some sort of education was very important to get to move forward. And so all their whole family, my whole family, like the grandkids, of the original people, and pretty much went to college and got an education. It was like really important to them. So
it's a way to show advancement and attainment and success in a lot of ways. I'm saying from a coal mining family, my grandparents and so forth, Italian background and growing up that way. And so, our view of it is so nuanced in many ways. Sometimes there's something we want to do, and we have to go through the education to get there. But I think the thing that I'm learning more and more is that some people have other paths, and we know that. And they have other ways of seeing it and other ideas about why they're there and what they understand about what it means to be there. So what are some things that might sometimes rub? And again, I always hesitate to use that term Appalachian culture because I really don't believe it's all of Appalachia, but there are some belief systems, out there. Some of our students coming from rural areas, and this was true, the community that I was from, the idea of subsistence living was valued. And I have a hard time with the word subsistence because to me, it sounds like you're saying it's okay to be poor. And it wasn't that way at all. I go back to, there's a documentary that has an interview with an older woman living in a part of Kentucky. And clearly when you see the home and where they are, I mean, they don't have a lot of material things, but her point is her family's all in the same place. They love each other very much. And she said, nobody's ever hungry and everybody's taken care of. And to her, that's my value system. And so for some of them, you know, having that recognized and respected is really important, but it also sometimes creates that rub for them because they don't always have that family that's saying, I understand what you're doing. I wish you could see the look on my mother's face, who was very supportive of college when I said, Mama, I'm going to study psychology. Her experience with psychology was she had seen some people on Oprah and she wanted to know if I was going to be, and she was, I don't mean that she wasn't educated or bright, she was, but she didn't quite understand how that fit. So sometimes we have students that have families that are supportive, but don't quite understand what is this going to mean in the bigger world. And a lot of times they value the knowledge that comes through community-based learning very, very much, and don't always understand why school is taking so much time, and why there is so much of your life that gets tied up with that. Some students come from backgrounds that are more collective than individual, and they're used to a different way of solving problems and working than that situation that some classrooms create, which can be very competitive and, for lack of a better term, very unsupportive. It's sort of like, if you know it, you get rewarded. If you don't know it, you get punished. Rather than focusing on the idea of progress and learning. And that's not to throw shade at any of my colleagues, but it's a difference. It's a difference. For some students, it's the idea of getting above your raisin. You know, some family members feeling intimidated by what they're doing or not understanding what they're doing. And sometimes when you have students that have already had some friction with their family, for example, students that may find themselves identifying in terms of sexual orientation in a way that doesn't fit their family. So they've already got that friction. Now they're in college, that can really drive some wedges, that can create some really difficult situations for everybody. But particularly for our students in finding their place. A lot of them are raised with this identity that's tied to their place in family. And a number of them, I mean, they navigate it, but they sort of get that feeling when they get to college that they don't quite fit here. But they're finding themselves feeling a little more distant from home. And like I always say, 8.5 times out of 10, not a real statistic, they'll navigate that and they'll grow, but it can be an issue. It can be a stressor for them as they're trying to figure those things out. And the level of support that they have can have some impact on how that goes for them. To give you an example, I think we all need them, those of us that work in higher ed. Those kids that left home and now find that they feel they can't go back. And literally sometimes can, when school is not in session, be homeless. Because they either psychologically or physically cannot go back to home and they don't have the resources to stay here. So they can have these very unique stressors that they experience. So we know that here in West Virginia, we have some specific challenges that students face. They can have very variable education experiences. Poverty rates are high. And no matter how reasonable the education cost is, when your family is smack in the middle of middle class or working class, it's expensive and it's hard. COVID supports have sunset, so there are a lot of students that are experiencing less support than they had before. We have a number of students that apply for assistance through assistance with food and assistance with other things that have lost those supports since those sunsetted. And then I like the idea of syndemic. You know, it wasn't the opioid epidemic, it wasn't COVID, it was that we had these layers of things that happened. And so those kinds of things create some differences, I think, for our students, some unique challenges. But there's also resilience, those social connections, those tendencies to create stronger social connections, looking for those connections. I think is a true resilience factor among our students. The idea of grit that we think about and talk about more often, a growth mindset, that I can do things, I can do hard things. You know, particularly students who have that value that they grew up with, that, you know, if you want it, you have to work for it. A lot of them do have that identity and sense of belonging, that connectedness, that desire to give back to something bigger than yourself and be part of local solutions. A lot of our students, like I've got one in particular, his biggest desire right now, he said, I don't want to go back home and live. He's from one of the poor rural areas. He said, it's not that I want to go back there, that I want to make sure that I do something for where I came from. You know, there's a very strong sense of that. That I think can provide a lot of resilience if we create the right environment for them to use that. So I'm going to kind of skip through this real fast because it's just reminding us of something that we talked about earlier, which is in terms of mental health, we know that sometimes students can have experiences, particularly traumas. And since I know some folks are going to talk specifically about trauma, they'll deal with that. But their sort of way of thinking and focusing on things may be different, and they may have some challenges already with regulating emotion and focusing. We get a lot of students who come in and want to be tested for attentional issues. They think they have attention deficit because they can't focus, they can't get their work done. And what we find sometimes is a history of some generational conflict and trauma. Sometimes it's mild to moderate. But they have a lot of anxiety, a lot of things they worry about, and they just can't focus. And it isn't just that they need to feel better, it's that their brain is just working a different way, and it's creating some stresses for them. So what do we need to think about? And this also may hit some of the things that Candace spoke about in her talk. We have to recognize that having more mental health resources on campus, which we do nationally, is a good thing, but it's not going to solve the issue. We can't just therapy our way out of what we're currently seeing with our students, because everything is not necessarily something that needs to be addressed by therapy, but we certainly need to make those resources available. But we also need to put more mental, as I like to call it, mental health in the water. We need to develop more of a culture that the students' health and well-being is really everybody's job. And that students come to us with particular goals, and our job is not just to be experts in our discipline as faculty and go in and put that out there, but we also need to be aware that we're doing that within the context of a created community and make sure that we're being appropriately supportive. We need to recognize that in some ways the rise in symptoms are a reflection of progress. They got here. And so we need to make sure that we're supporting them. And that some of the rise in symptoms that happen once they get here is a result of lack of goodness of fit. Sometimes we are creating barriers without realizing we're creating them, simply because this is the way we've always done it. Things like financial aid, and how do you access it, and how do you keep it, and who do you go to when you're about to lose it, and what can you fill in with if you can't get enough. All of those things are barriers to our students who are coming to us and really doing their best to make it through successfully, that can create true mental health, that can exacerbate existing problems and can create problems when they're not there. So we need to take a good hard look at our systems and make sure that they are clear to people who, as I say, don't know the secret handshakes. who can't pick up the phone and call the financial aid office and say, I have this problem, can you fix it for me? Most students can't do that. So how do we create a system that doesn't add to the stresses that they already experience? So we need to think about that first tier. You know, what are we doing universally across, you know, the whole system to make sure that we're making college and the higher education experience and beyond accessible to everyone, that we're not just sort of sticking with what we've always done because boy, that was rigorous and that made people smart. This may or may not be a good thing to say, but I will say that the older system was good for a certain group, but it certainly didn't create opportunity and education that was open and inclusive for everyone. Okay. So again, this is something that I know you're going to talk more about, but in later presentations, so we won't spend a lot of time. But I think looking around and thinking about things from, even if students haven't experienced trauma, this is a way to create an environment that is supportive of learning. And when I looked at that, I thought, yeah, this is what we need to be doing when we think about students who are experiencing depression. So they are staying to themselves more, they are isolating, and it's hard for them to get going. Well, are we creating unnecessary barriers where they don't feel safe, where they don't have a sense of trust, they don't know where to go? Then we need to think about that across the university. How can we do more of that? So how do we create more awareness? Regardless of whether students need therapy or not, how do we make faculty more aware? As a faculty member, I'm aware that we don't like to go to trainings. We don't like to sit through things. We don't like to do other things. We want to do our, you know, our disciplines, what we feel we were hired to do, but we need to create ways to make people more aware. You don't have to be a therapist. You just have to be supportive and know where to direct people. I think mental health first aid is the greatest thing ever. You know, we've got counseling centers, and I'm aware that one of my colleagues is here, that are just overrun right now. Then what can we be doing to create more natural helpers in the environment that understand mental health, that can be a good listener? We need to make sure that resources are freely available and accessible. That students don't have to figure out which door do I need to go through to get the information I need. And we need to get feedback from all the students, not just the ones who respond to the email that we sent out asking for feedback. We need to do a walkthrough of our university environment that takes into account all the vantage points, so we understand the barriers that we didn't mean to create, but that are there. I said, I'm so acutely aware of students, and I'm not saying there's a ton of them, but students who literally don't have any place to go when the dorms are closed. I'm also aware of the students who can't stay here because they can't afford the dorms. And they're worrying in their classes and experiencing all kinds of concerns, and we're exacerbating those issues. Creating safe and predictable environments. How do we put supportive presences all over the place in the dormitories, you know, getting rid of the boot camp mentality, you know, really sort of embracing and leaning into the idea that we're all here to learn, not prove who is best. How do we change that narrative so we begin to support students? Focusing on scaffolding and collaboration in the classroom instead of competing and conquering. How do we do that in a way that supports learning, but at the same time doesn't punish the student who is coming in with a longer learning curve? Anticipating things like food insecurity, between semester homelessness, social isolation. How can we create more environments where students can sit and hang out? I am amazed, maybe that was a pandemic thing because we wanted to decrease contact. But, you know, we tend to create events for students to attend. And then I know I'm one of those people that's like, why didn't anybody come? because I have other things to do. Maybe I just need to create the opportunities for students to do what they want to do and can do. Making resources easy to access with no questions asked. We have so many rules and so many things that keep students from finding out what they need to know. Those kinds of things need to really be examined. We need to take a very close look at hidden costs. They have to have the best computer, the best calculator, the most current textbook. I understand that as an educator, I get it. It creates another layer of stress for kids that are already dealing with a lot of stressors. So how do we continually pay attention to the support to do that? We also need to think about the feedback that we're giving them from all different angles. We send out DNF reports, but we very seldom tell them steps that they need to take to do better. And so we need to look at how we're evaluating students and how they understand what to do with that evaluation. We need to increase the number of doors that lead to answers. And we need to, again, as we said, begin to identify those natural supports that are available in the environment. Our students naturally gravitate toward relationships, but they're not always students who have come from more rural environments where they've had more restricted experience. We know from neuroscience, it's harder to branch out when you've been in a more restricted environment. So we need to create more opportunities to build those relationships and not always expect the student to be able to do that on their own, but also not force it. But students who come from more insulated environments are going to shy away from those new experiences that we all value and tell them they need to do to build their CVs and their resumes. So we need to think about how do we support those students in branching out and make them more comfortable in doing those sorts of things. And we need to start by educating faculty on how to do that in a more supportive way. These are all things that help support self-regulation. Again, students who are from more restricted environments, when they begin to get overwhelmed, they may get overwhelmed more easily. And their natural reaction is going to be to retreat to someplace safe, which might be a dorm room, it might be home, to self-regulate. So how can we create environments on campus that can help with that self-regulation process? So it doesn't mean that we have to not allow students to experience stress. Of course, they're going to experience it. We just need to give them the opportunity to regulate and get back to a good space so that they're able to continue rather than continuing to push and exacerbate stresses in an unnecessary fashion. So I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, and I want to stop so that there's some time to chat and discuss. But I love this particular poem because it reminds us that we have no idea what's going on with our students sometimes. And I'll hear a lot of people when a student has conflicts with work and they couldn't get something done. Well, you have to set your priorities. Sometimes, well, and I may have told some students they need to respond with, well, yeah, eating was a priority today, so I went to work. These things are a priority. So I think as we see this increase in mental health needs, we have to be very mindful of how we can create a structure that supports the needs of our students. So I will stop there and open it to questions or comments.
I had something that I would just witnessed my daughter navigate going through college. And really it's interesting that you're tying it to Appalachian culture, because sometimes we don't always identify that way just from where we live. It's a little further, it's in Ohio, it was just right across the border in Ohio, but the one thing that for her, and she is one of those people that is an introvert, but just the part, like, they would have activities and things for people to do, but if you don't have anyone to go with, you don't really feel comfortable going. So it's that initial, and I would compare it to my experience sometime, only because that part of my experience before we had social media and all that stuff, we did different things and we met each other. And so that, and I know like some things from back then changed for the good, and some things obviously didn't necessarily change for the good, and that might be one of them. So I would say just ways to get the students physically to connect with each other. And so that to me seemed like the one thing that was lacking for her. She, and part of her experience was through COVID too, but part of it wasn't. And it, so that would be what I saw her struggling with the most. And I think if there would have been a connection, like if they all would have went to breakfast together, lunch together, something that they might have connected a little, like that in their dorms, that just did not happen. Even if they had a meeting, people just didn't go, or, it wasn't, it definitely was hard to watch on some level, but she turned out good, but it was definitely hard. I'll be quiet now. Sorry.
Oh, now I feel you. The other thing, it's somebody to go with, and it costs money. So much of socializing costs. And, I think we forget how essential that is to all students, not just students from Appalachia. But students who have those financial challenges, and the only way they can interact with people is to have money to go out to dinner or pay for this or that, and they can't do it. So yeah, I have seen a lot of students fail to create their network because they just can't afford to do what the other students are doing. And that's significant to me.